I shouldn't have checked my phone. The blue light illuminated my face as I lay in Sarah's guest bedroom, unable to sleep. The message from an unknown number kept replaying in my mind. Don't let her fall asleep first. I glanced over at Sarah, who was scrolling through her own phone, completely oblivious to my growing unease. Sarah's house had always felt different at night. During our previous sleepovers, I'd blamed it on the usual unfamiliarity of sleeping somewhere other than home. But tonight, something felt off. The security light outside cast harsh shadows through the window, creating distorted shapes on the walls. Her parents were away for the weekend, leaving us alone in the sprawling suburban house. Earlier that evening, we'd raided her parents' wine cabinet, something we'd never done before. Sarah had been insistent, almost aggressive about it. The cheap red wine left a bitter taste in my mouth, and now my head was spinning slightly. The kitchen downstairs still bore evidence of our teenage rebellion. Empty bottle on the counter, dishes from our midnight snack piled in the sink. "I need to use the bathroom," Sarah announced, her voice oddly flat. As she left the room, I watched her disappear down the hallway. The house creaked and settled, sounds that seemed amplified in the late-night silence. The anonymous text message weighed heavily on my mind. I'd tried calling the number back earlier, but it had been disconnected. I opened the message again. Below the warning was a second text I hadn't noticed before. "She's not who you think she is. Check the basement." My hands trembled as I switched on my phone's flashlight. Sarah had been gone for almost 10 minutes now. The rational part of my brain said this was just a cruel prank, but something deeper, more instinctual, urged me to investigate. The stairs to the basement creaked under my feet as I descended. Sarah's house was old, dating back to the 1960s, and the basement had always been off-limits during our previous visits. She'd claimed it was just storage and her dad's workshop, but I'd never seen either of her parents go down there. The flashlight beam seemed weak against the pressing darkness. At the bottom of the stairs, my light fell upon a table covered in old photographs. My blood ran cold as I examined them. They showed Sarah, or someone who looked exactly like her, in different time periods. The clothes and hairstyles changed, but her face remained the same, unnaturally ageless. In some photos, she stood next to girls who looked eerily similar to me. Same height, same hair color, same general features. Their faces had been scratched out. Behind the table was a door, slightly ajar. I pushed it open to reveal what looked like a child's bedroom, preserved in time. A thin layer of dust covered everything except the bed, which looked recently disturbed. My stomach lurched when I noticed leather restraints attached to the bedposts. On the bedside table sat a diary, its pages yellow with age. The diary's first entry was dated 1964. Another failed attempt. The girl wasn't strong enough. I must find someone whose life force can sustain me through the next cycle. The hunger grows stronger. The entries continued through the decades, each describing failed attempts and replacements. The most recent entry was dated just last month. "Emma shows promise. Her energy is pure, untainted. She will be the one. I was wondering when curiosity would get the better of you." Sarah's voice drifted down from the top of the stairs. I spun around, dropping the diary. She stood in the doorway, her silhouette black against the dim light from upstairs. But something was wrong with her shape. Her proportions seemed distorted, elongated. As she descended the stairs, her movements were fluid, almost serpentine. The face I'd known for years began to shift and change. Her skin grew pale and translucent, her eyes darkening until they were bottomless pools of black. "You should have heeded the warning and stayed awake," she said, her voice now a multi-toned whisper that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I backed away until I hit the wall. The emergency lights kicked on, bathing everything in a hellish red glow. Sarah, or whatever she was, continued to transform. Her jaw dislocated, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. "Your life force will sustain me for decades," she hissed, "just like all the others. Why do you think I chose you as my best friend? I've been grooming you for months." In that moment of horror, survival instinct took over. I ducked under her reaching arms and bolted for the stairs. Her inhuman shriek followed me as I took the steps 2 at a time. I could hear her pursuing, her movements creating sickening, scuttling sounds against the walls and ceiling. I didn't stop running until I reached my house 6 blocks away. The night was quiet except for my ragged breathing and the distant sound of sirens. When I finally looked back, nothing seemed to be following me. But I could still feel her eyes on me, watching, waiting. The next day, Sarah acted as if nothing had happened. She called and texted repeatedly, asking why I'd left in the middle of the night. Her messages were perfectly normal, her voicemail messages filled with confused concern. To everyone else, she was still the same Sarah, the popular, pretty girl who'd chosen me as her best friend. But I knew the truth now. I never responded to her messages or returned to school. My parents thought I was having a mental breakdown when I tried to explain. They sent me to therapy, convinced I'd had some sort of psychotic episode. Maybe they're right. Maybe it was all in my mind. But sometimes late at night, I see a familiar silhouette standing under the streetlight outside my window, and my phone occasionally lights up with messages from unknown numbers, warning others about sleepovers and best friends who aren't what they seem. I don't know if I'm trying to save them, or if she's using my old phone to lure her next victim. All I know is that I never sleep deeply anymore, and I never, ever accept invitations to sleepovers. They say traumatic memories fade with time, but I remember every detail of that night with perfect clarity. The police cars, the ambulances, the yellow tape wrapped around Madison's house like a grotesque birthday present. It's been exactly 1 year since the sleepover that changed everything. The local news called it a tragedy. They had no idea what really happened. It started innocently enough. Madison had invited our gaming group over for an all-night session to try out her new VR setup. Her parents were loaded. They'd bought her the latest model with all the accessories. None of us had anything close to that at home. There were 5 of us: Madison, Kai, Rachel, Tyler, and me. The first few hours were normal sleepover stuff. We demolished 3 pizzas, chugged energy drinks, and took turns with the VR headset. Madison's parents were at some charity gala and wouldn't be back until morning. Her little brother was at a friend's house. We had the whole place to ourselves, which felt amazing at the time. Looking back, our isolation should have been the first warning sign. Around midnight, Madison showed us something she'd been keeping secret. A package that had arrived that morning, ordered from some sketchy overseas website. Inside was what looked like a modified VR headset with additional sensors and weird attachments. The writing on the manual was in Japanese, with badly translated English underneath. "It's supposed to enhance the gaming experience," she said, grinning. "Make it more realistic." Tyler volunteered to try it first. He'd always been the daredevil of our group, never backing down from a challenge. Madison helped him adjust the straps and connect all the sensors. The headset looked different from any VR gear I'd seen before, more angular, with pulsing red lights along the sides. The website said it uses some kind of neural feedback technology, Madison explained as she booted up the system. Almost immediately, something seemed wrong. Tyler's breathing became rapid and shallow. Sweat beaded on his forehead, his hands clenched and unclenched rhythmically. "Guys," he gasped, "something feels weird. I can't, it's too real. I can feel everything." Before we could help him remove the headset, his body went rigid. The seizure lasted maybe 30 seconds, but it felt like hours. We couldn't get the headset off. The locks had engaged somehow. When Tyler finally stopped convulsing, the headset powered down on its own. But when we removed it, we knew something was terribly wrong. His eyes were open, but there was no recognition in them, no awareness at all. Rachel tried calling 911, but our phones had no signal, all of them at the same time. The landline was dead too. Madison ran to the neighbors, but no one answered their doors. It was like the whole neighborhood had been cut off from the outside world. We were trapped with our catatonic friend and that cursed headset. We carried Tyler upstairs to the guest room and laid him on the bed. His eyes remained open, staring at nothing, his chest rising and falling in a shallow rhythm. Kai suggested we try the headset again. Maybe we could figure out what happened to Tyler. Madison agreed, but Rachel and I protested. We just watched it fry our friend's brain. Why would we risk another person? While the others argued, I examined Madison's computer. trying to find information about the website where she'd ordered the device. The browser history had been cleared, but I managed to find some cached pages. What I discovered made my blood run cold. The site wasn't for gaming equipment. It was a black market research forum. The headset was an experimental device for consciousness transfer. By the time I raced back upstairs to warn the others, Kai was already wearing the headset. Madison had convinced him while I was gone. The red lights were pulsing faster now, and I could hear a high-pitched whine coming from the device. Kai's body began to twitch, just like Tyler's had. But this time, something even more terrifying happened. Tyler's body suddenly sat up, eyes still vacant, moving like a puppet on strings. As Kai convulsed, Tyler's mouth opened in a silent scream. The headset's lights synchronized with Tyler's movements. With horror, we realized what was happening. The device wasn't just frying their brains. It was transferring consciousness between them. Madison finally broke down and confessed. She hadn't bought the headset for gaming. Her parents' medical company had been experimenting with consciousness transfer technology, trying to help coma patients. The research was deemed too dangerous and shut down. Madison had found one of the prototypes and decided to test it on us. She thought it would be exciting, an adventure. Rachel snapped. She lunged at Madison, trying to grab the headset's control unit. In the struggle, the device activated again, this time latching onto both of them. We watched helplessly as their consciousness began to transfer. But something went wrong. The power fluctuated, and the transfer process corrupted. Both of them collapsed, blood trickling from their noses. I did the only thing I could think of. I destroyed the headset. Smashed it against the wall until it was in pieces. The red lights flickered and died. The high-pitched whine faded to silence. In the quiet that followed, I could hear sirens in the distance. Whatever had been blocking our phones had ended with the headset's destruction. The official story was carbon monoxide poisoning from a faulty heating system. That's what the papers reported, what the doctors testified, what Madison's parents paid everyone to believe. Tyler and Kai recovered eventually, but they were different. They would sometimes respond to the wrong names, have memories that belonged to each other. Rachel and Madison remained in comas for months. When they finally woke up, neither of them remembered anything about that night. But I remember. I've seen the brain scans showing patterns that doctors can't explain. I've watched my friends struggle with identities that don't quite fit anymore. I know the truth about consciousness transfer technology and why it should have stayed theoretical. Some boundaries aren't meant to be crossed. Some games aren't meant to be played. I got rid of my own VR headset after that night. I can't even look at the technology without remembering what happened. Sometimes late at night, I wonder if any of us came back quite right. If pieces of us got lost in the transfer, or if something else came back with us. But mostly, I wonder about the other prototype headsets that were never accounted for, and who might be testing them right now at their own innocent sleepovers. I never should have taken that babysitting job. The flyer had seemed innocent enough, posted on the community board at our local coffee shop. Responsible teenager needed for overnight childcare, excellent pay. My mom thought it was weird they were offering $500 for one night, but I convinced her it was because of the length of the stay and the remote location. The Lewis house sat at the end of a long, private road, surrounded by old-growth forest. Mrs. Lewis greeted me at the door, all perfect makeup and designer clothes. She explained that she and her husband had a charity event in the city, 2 hours away. They'd be gone until morning. Her daughter Emma's regular babysitter had canceled last minute, and their 12-year-old was too anxious to sleep alone. The house was immaculate, like something out of a magazine. Mrs. Lewis showed me around while Mr. Lewis waited impatiently in their Tesla. Everything was white. White walls, white furniture, white marble countertops. A list of rules was stuck to the fridge with magnetic letters that seemed out of place in the sterile environment. "Emma knows the routine," Mrs. Lewis said. "Just make sure she follows it exactly." Emma didn't look like a typical 12-year-old. She sat ramrod straight on the white couch, wearing a pressed dress that seemed more suitable for a formal event than a night at home. Her long, dark hair was perfectly styled, not a strand out of place. She didn't respond when her parents left, just stared straight ahead until the sound of their car faded away. I checked the rules again. They were oddly specific. 1. Emma must take her medication at exactly 7 p.m. 2. No deviation from routine. 3. No outside contact after 8 p.m. 4. No mirrors to be covered. 5. Emma must be monitored at all times. 6. Do not let her convince you to change any rules. The last rule was underlined 3 times in red ink. The first few hours were uneventful. Emma did her homework while I sat nearby, texting friends about how weird but easy this gig was. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the white carpet. At 6:55 p.m., Emma closed her textbook and announced it was time for her medication. Her voice was flat, emotionless, like she was reading from a script. The medication was arranged in a labeled organizer. Thursday night's compartment contained 5 pills of different sizes and colors. Some looked like normal prescription medications, but others I didn't recognize. They seemed almost handmade. Emma swallowed them without water, her movements mechanical and practiced. That's when things started getting strange. Emma sat in front of the television, but didn't turn it on. She just stared at her reflection in the black screen. When I asked if she wanted to watch something, she replied, "It's not time yet. We have to wait for them to settle." I assumed she meant the pills, but something about the way she said it made my skin crawl. I noticed then just how many mirrors were in the house. They lined the hallways, covered portions of the walls, even the ceiling had mirrored panels, all positioned to reflect each other, creating infinite recursions of the white interior. Emma's reflection appeared in every one, although she hadn't moved from her spot in front of the TV. By 8 p.m., my phone had lost service completely. The battery, which had been nearly full, had drained to 15%. When I used the house phone to call my mom, the line was dead. Emma watched me with those empty eyes and said, "Rule 3, no outside contact after 8 p.m. They need to concentrate." At 8:30, Emma's behavior changed. Her fingers gripped the armrests of her chair, knuckles turning white. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cool air conditioning. "It's starting," she whispered. "Don't look away. Rule 5 says you have to watch." Her voice had changed, carrying an undertone that sounded much older than 12. I couldn't look away if I tried. In every mirror, Emma's reflection was slightly different. One smiled while she frowned. Another lifted its hand while hers remained clenched on the armrests. They were becoming less like reflections and more like separate entities, all wearing her face but moving independently. Emma's face began to shift, cycling through expressions like someone flipping through channels. Her voice came in different tones, different ages, different personalities. "The medication helps thin the walls," she explained in a child's voice. "Makes it easier for them to come through," added an elderly woman's rasp. "They need mirrors to cross over," finished what sounded like a middle-aged man. I ran to the bathroom, trying to escape, only to find more mirrors. The medicine cabinet was open, revealing dozens of pill bottles with handwritten labels, barrier suppressant, dimensional thinners, vessel preparation formula. They were experimenting on her, using their own daughter as a gateway for something. When I returned to the living room, there were multiple Emmas. Some looked older, some younger, some barely human. They moved in synchronized patterns, performing what looked like a ritual. The original Emma remained in her chair, tears streaming down her face. "Please," she whispered in her true voice, "help me break the mirrors. It's the only way to stop them." I didn't hesitate. I grabbed a fireplace poker and started smashing mirrors. Each one that broke seemed to release a silent scream. The reflections shattered, taking their alternate Emmas with them. She helped too, using a candlestick to destroy her prison of infinite reflections. As each mirror broke, she became more herself, more like a real 12-year-old girl. We destroyed the medication next, flushing the pills and burning the labels. Emma told me everything as we worked. Her parents weren't scientists or doctors. They were members of a cult that believed in accessing parallel dimensions. They'd been using their daughter as a vessel, preparing her to be a bridge between realities. The medication and mirrors were just the visible parts of their ritual. The police arrived at dawn, responding to reports of breaking glass. They found us sitting on the front steps, surrounded by mirror shards and empty pill bottles. Emma's parents were arrested when they returned, their Tesla full of cult paraphernalia and journals detailing their experiments. Child Protective Services took Emma to her aunt in another state, somewhere she could be a normal teenager. The story made the local news, but the real horror was covered up. The official report mentioned child endangerment and unauthorized drug trials, but nothing about parallel dimensions or living reflections. Emma emails me sometimes from her new home. She's doing better now, learning to be herself instead of a vessel for others. She's down to just one reflection in mirrors, her own. I still babysit sometimes, but never overnight, and I always check for mirrors first. I've taken down most of the ones in my own house too, because sometimes, late at night, I swear I can see other versions of myself moving independently in reflective surfaces. And I can't help but wonder if breaking those mirrors really stopped the experiment, or if it just set something free.